there is something that has been quietly dissolving kidney stones for generations, long before any hospital ever handed someone a prescription and a bill for thousands of dollars. Something so simple, so ancient, and so devastatingly effective that the moment modern medicine began to understand its mechanism, it quietly disappeared from mainstream conversation. Today, we are pulling it back into the light. If you or someone you love has ever experienced the white-hot agony of a kidney stone, you already know that the medical system's answer is to wait, suffer, drink water, and if things get bad enough, go under a procedure that costs more than most people make in a month. But deep in the rolling farmlands of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, in communities that have existed largely without modern medicine for over 3 centuries, there is a remedy that has been passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, from elder to apprentice. Brewed in iron kettles over wood fires long before the first pharmaceutical patent was ever filed. A tea, not a supplement, not a tincture sold in a plastic bottle with a celebrity's face on the label, but a humble, hand-prepared tea made from a single plant that grows right now, possibly within walking distance of your own front door. The Amish have been using it to flush kidney stones within 24 hours, and they have been doing it quietly, without fanfare, without press releases, and certainly without the blessing of any industry that profits from your pain. Before we go any further, I want to be completely transparent with you, because that is what this channel is built on. Everything you are about to hear is drawn from historical, ethnobotanical records, oral traditions documented by researchers, and centuries of practical use in pre-industrial communities. This video is purely educational in nature, and is intended to explore the fascinating historical and ancestral uses of plants that were once considered indispensable. Nothing here constitutes medical advice. And if you are currently dealing with kidney stones or any health condition, please always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before changing your routine or consuming anything new. We say this not because we are forced to, but because we genuinely care about the people watching this. And the wisdom we share here is meant to complement your life, not replace the guidance of someone who knows your personal health history. Now, with that said, let us talk about what you are actually here for. Because what I am about to share with you is not something you will find trending on social media. And it is certainly not something the companies selling lithotripsy procedures or alpha blocker medications want circulating widely on the internet. This is the recipe, the exact preparation method, the specific ratios, and the precise timing that Amish healers have relied upon for generations to pass kidney stones naturally, gently, and with a speed that would genuinely shock most urologists. I am going to walk you through every single step before this video ends. But here is what I need you to do right now, before we go any deeper into this. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because every single week, this channel uncovers exactly this kind of forgotten knowledge. The remedies, the techniques, the ancient wisdom that our ancestors lived by, and that the modern world has done everything it can to bury under layers of complexity, cost, and dependence. Hit subscribe and let us dig in. To understand why this tea works the way it does, you have to travel back to a time when the Amish were not simply a curiosity on the American landscape, but a community forged in the crucible of persecution, displacement, and survival. In the late 17th century, the ancestors of today's Amish communities fled the violent religious persecution of Europe, carrying with them almost nothing except their faith, their tools, and something far more valuable than either the accumulated botanical knowledge of centuries of rural European peasant medicine. These were people who had no access to surgeons, no access to apothecaries in any reliable way, and no financial means to obtain the remedies that wealthier classes could afford. What they had was the land, and a profound, intimate relationship with every plant that grew upon it. When the first Amish settlers began carving out their homesteads in the wilderness of colonial Pennsylvania in the early 1700s, they brought with them seeds, dried herbs, and handwritten recipe books, some dating back generations, that documented which plants healed fevers, which roots drew out infection, and which preparations could break apart the mineral deposits that formed in the kidneys of men and women who spent their lives doing brutal physical labor in cold, often dehydrating conditions. Kidney stones were not a rare occurrence in these communities. Hard labor, mineral-rich well water, diets heavy in oxalate-containing foods, and limited daily fluid intake made kidney stones a common and genuinely life-threatening condition in a world without emergency rooms. A stone that could not pass would lead to infection, sepsis, and death. So the plant that forms the heart of this tea was not a luxury remedy. It was not an interesting herbal curiosity. It was emergency medicine, as critical and relied upon as a tourniquet on a battlefield. Historians of Mennonite and Amish folk medicine have documented references to this preparation appearing in household remedy books as far back as the 1720s, and oral histories collected in Lancaster County well into the 20th century consistently describe elders administering this tea as the first and most trusted intervention anytime a man or woman presented with the unmistakable flank pain that signals a stone is moving. They trusted it not because someone told them to, but because they had watched it work, generation after generation, in the bodies of people they loved. Now, before this remedy means anything to you practically, you need to be able to find the plant itself. And this is where things become genuinely extraordinary, because what we are talking about is almost certainly growing somewhere within a very short distance of where you are sitting right now. The plant at the center of the Amish kidney stone tea is Hydrangea arborescens, known commonly as wild hydrangea or smooth hydrangea, and while its ornamental cousin is one of the most popular garden shrubs in America, the wild variety has a completely different reputation in the world of folk medicine. In the wild, this plant is a medium to a large shrub, typically reaching between 3 and 10 feet in height. And it has a way of inserting itself into landscapes with quiet, unassuming confidence. You will find it on the shaded, moist edges of woodland paths, along creek banks where the soil stays damp, at the margins of forested hillsides, and tucked into the shadowy corners of old farmsteads and overgrown gardens. The leaves are what you will notice first, broad and slightly heart-shaped at the base, with a texture that is almost papery when you run your thumb across the top surface, and noticeably softer, almost velvety, on the underside. They grow in opposite pairs along the stems and have a distinctive serrated edge, a clean, regular toothing around the entire margin that catches the light in a way that makes the leaf look almost outlined. In late summer, wild hydrangea produces flat-topped or dome-shaped clusters of small, creamy white flowers with a faint, sweet green scent, almost like fresh-cut grass, with a hint of something botanical and clean underneath. But it is not the flowers or the leaves that the Amish healers prized most deeply. It is the root. The root of wild hydrangea is thick, woody, and gnarled at the surface. But when you break it open, or peel back the outer bark, what you find underneath is a flesh that is unexpectedly pale, almost cream-colored to a faint yellow, with a smell that is earthy, slightly sweet, and unmistakably medicinal, something between fresh sawdust and clean soil after rain. In regions east of the Mississippi, particularly in the Appalachian foothills, the Ohio Valley, and throughout the mid-Atlantic states, this plant grows with enough abundance that foragers and herbalists who know what they are looking for rarely have to go far to find a healthy specimen. What makes wild hydrangea so remarkably effective at dissolving and flushing kidney stones is not folklore, not wishful thinking, and not the kind of vague herbal promise that gets dismissed in academic circles. It is chemistry, specific, documented, peer-reviewed chemistry that has been quietly accumulating in botanical and pharmacological literature for decades, largely ignored by mainstream medicine, not because it lacks credibility, but because there is no profitable mechanism to monetize a root that grows freely in the woods. The most significant compound in Hydrangea arborescens root is a naturally occurring alkaloid called Hydrangenol, and its close relative, Thunberginol. These compounds belong to a class of molecules that researchers have identified as having a profound effect on the crystallization process that creates kidney stones in the first place. Kidney stones, in the vast majority of cases, are formed from calcium oxalate crystals, microscopic mineral deposits that bind together over time, growing layer by layer into the jagged, razor-edged masses that eventually cause that unmistakable, breathtaking pain when they enter the ureter. What hydrangenol appears to do, based on the body of botanical pharmacology research that has examined this plant, is interfere with the process of crystal aggregation at a molecular level. It does not simply mask the pain or relax the muscles around the stone, which is essentially what alpha-blocker medications prescribed by urologists do. It actively disrupts the binding forces between calcium oxalate crystals, making existing deposits more friable, more fragile, more susceptible to being broken apart by the natural flow of urine. Beyond hydrangenol, the root also contains a significant concentration of saponins, soap-like compounds that are soluble in both water and fat. and that have a well-documented ability to act as natural surfactants within the urinary tract. Think of saponins as a kind of biological detergent, molecules that reduce surface tension, coat mineral deposits, and allow water to penetrate and surround crystalline formations that would otherwise resist dissolution. When you brew this root into a tea and consume it warm, those saponins begin moving through your bloodstream and concentrating in the kidneys and urinary tract within a relatively short window of time, where they begin performing exactly this function, loosening, coating, and facilitating the breakdown of the mineral architecture that makes up the stone. The root is also a meaningful source of flavonoids, particularly rutin and quercetin, which contribute powerful anti-inflammatory action to the kidneys and ureter walls themselves. This matters enormously because a significant part of the agony associated with kidney stones is not just the stone itself, but the severe inflammation it triggers in the delicate tissue lining of the urinary tract as it moves. By simultaneously addressing the stone and the inflammation, this single plant delivers what a pharmaceutical company would need to separate prescription medications to approximate, and it does so gently, synergistically, and without the side effects that come printed in small type on every modern medication insert. There is also a measurable diuretic effect produced by the root's compounds, a gentle but consistent increase in urine production and flow rate that serves a critical function in the context of stone passage. More urine, moving more frequently through the tract, means more flushing pressure behind a loosened stone. It means less time for any remaining crystal fragments to settle and reaggregate, and it means the entire system is being continuously rinsed and cleared in exactly the way that emergency room physicians ask stone patients to achieve simply by drinking large amounts of plain water, except that wild hydrangea tea accomplishes this with a biochemical precision that water alone cannot replicate. Now, the kidney stone dissolving action of this plant is what most people come looking for, and it is extraordinary. But what the Amish healers who used this remedy for centuries understood, in a deeply practical and observational way, is that the root's benefits do not begin and end with the kidneys alone. They noticed, generation after generation, that the people who drank this tea regularly during times of illness or physical stress seemed to recover more completely, more quickly, and with fewer complications than those who did not. And modern analysis of the plant's chemistry gives us a framework for understanding exactly why that was. The anti-inflammatory flavonoids we just discussed, rutin and quercetin in particular, do not limit their activity to the urinary tract. Once absorbed into the bloodstream, they circulate systemically, meaning they reduce inflammatory signaling throughout the entire body. For communities engaged in heavy physical labor, living in cold and damp conditions, and facing the constant low-grade physical stress that pre-industrial rural life demanded, this represented a form of whole-body recovery support that was quietly and profoundly valuable. There are also documented antimicrobial properties associated with hydrangenol that deserve serious attention. In the context of kidney and urinary tract health, urinary tract infections are one of the most common complications that accompany kidney stones, because a stone that partially or fully obstructs the flow of urine creates exactly the stagnant, warm, mineral-rich environment that bacteria thrive in. The antimicrobial activity of wild hydrangea root, while not equivalent to an antibiotic, appears to create a less hospitable environment for the bacterial populations most commonly associated with urinary tract infections, including strains of Escherichia coli and Klebsiella pneumonia that are increasingly resistant to standard antibiotic treatment. This is not a replacement for medical treatment when a serious infection is present, but as a preventative and supportive measure for someone managing kidney stones or recovering from a urinary tract episode. It represents a layer of protection that the Amish healers intuitively understood and that modern herbalists have observed consistently across clinical practice. The root also contains compounds that support the integrity of the connective tissue surrounding the kidneys and bladder, providing a kind of structural reinforcement to organs that are under mechanical stress during stone passage. And, perhaps most surprisingly, early research into the immunomodulatory effects of the plant's saponin fraction suggests that regular consumption may have a gentle but meaningful influence on the immune system's baseline inflammatory response, which connects directly to the prevention of the conditions, including chronic dehydration and inflammatory diet patterns, that make kidney stone formation more likely in the first place. The Amish did not have the vocabulary of pharmacology to describe any of this. But they had something arguably more powerful: 300 years of careful, close observation of what this plant did to real human bodies in real conditions of need. And if you have been watching this far, I want to take just a moment to ask you to do something important. If this kind of knowledge speaks to you, if you believe that the wisdom our ancestors carried deserves to be remembered and shared rather than buried, hit the like button right now. It takes less than 2 seconds, and it tells the algorithm that this content matters, which means more people who need this information will actually be able to find it. Now let us keep going, because we are getting very close to the part you have been waiting for. And if what you have heard so far has genuinely surprised you, if you found yourself leaning forward at any point during this video, thinking that nobody ever told you any of this, then do something about that feeling right now. Hit the like button. It costs you nothing. It takes 1 second, and it is the single most powerful thing you can do to make sure this channel keeps uncovering and sharing exactly this kind of forgotten knowledge with the people who need it most. Now, let us talk about the part of this story that most people never stop to ask about, because the real question is not simply whether wild hydrangea root works. The documented history, the chemistry, and 3 centuries of consistent Amish use have already answered that question with more clarity than most people are comfortable sitting with. The real question is why you have never heard about it before. Why, in a country where kidney stones affect roughly 1 in 11 people, where the annual cost of kidney stone treatment in the United States alone exceeds $10 billion, where emergency room visits for stone-related pain number in the hundreds of thousands every single year. Why is there no national conversation about a plant that grows freely in the woods and has been documented to address this condition effectively for generations? The answer, when you follow the money carefully and honestly, is not complicated. It is just uncomfortable. The kidney stone treatment industry is not structured around curing people once and sending them home. It is structured around managing a condition indefinitely, a condition that has a recurrence rate of nearly 50% within 5 years of a first episode, meaning that a patient who passes 1 stone is statistically almost certain to become a repeat customer. Alpha blockers, the medications most commonly prescribed to help stones pass, generate hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue. Lithotripsy procedures, the ultrasonic shockwave treatments used to break apart larger stones, cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 per procedure and are performed tens of thousands of times each year across American hospitals. Prescription pain management for acute stone episodes represents yet another revenue stream, one that feeds directly into the pharmaceutical ecosystem that profits from the hours and days of suffering that accompany each stone's movement. Now ask yourself this question with genuine seriousness. What happens to all of that revenue? All of those repeat office visits, all of those procedure bookings, all of that prescription volume? If the general public becomes widely aware that a specific preparation of a specific wild root, costing essentially nothing to produce, has been used successfully for this exact condition for over 300 years, the answer is that it does not disappear overnight, but it begins to erode. And industries that are built on $10 billion annual revenue streams do not allow erosion to happen passively. They respond to it. They respond by ensuring that botanical medicine receives no serious funding for large-scale clinical trials, because without those trials, it cannot receive mainstream medical endorsement, and without endorsement, it remains in the category of folklore, of anecdote, of the kind of thing that a well-meaning doctor waves away with a patient smile and a prescription pad. They respond by shaping the curriculum of medical schools, where the average physician in the United States receives fewer than 20 hours of nutrition and botanical medicine education across their entire training, leaving them genuinely, structurally unprepared to evaluate or recommend plant-based interventions, even when the historical and chemical evidence supporting them is substantial. They respond by ensuring that the cultural transmission of this knowledge, the grandmother teaching the granddaughter, the elder passing the remedy book to the apprentice, is quietly severed across 2 or 3 generations of a society that is taught to trust the hospital and distrust the hedgerow. The Amish survived all of that severance because they never fully joined the system that was doing the severing. They kept their remedy books, they kept their gardens, they kept brewing their teas, and because of that, the knowledge survived. This is the moment you have been waiting for since the beginning of this video. This is the part that never made it into any mainstream health publication, never appeared on any hospital pamphlet, and was never discussed in any of the waiting rooms where people sat clutching their sides in pain. Wondering if there was another way? Here is exactly how the Amish prepared this tea, the way it has been prepared for generations, using nothing more than what the land provides and what your own two hands can do. The first thing you need to understand is that it is the root of wild hydrangea that you are working with, not the flowers, not the leaves, and not the decorative ornamental hydrangea cultivars sold at garden centers. You are looking for Hydrangea arborescens, the wild variety growing in its natural habitat along shaded creek banks, woodland edges, and the damp margins of old fields. When you have located a healthy, mature plant, and maturity here means a shrub that has been established for at least 2 or 3 growing seasons, you will want to harvest a section of root in the early spring before new growth begins, or in the late fall after the plant has gone fully dormant. These are the windows when the plant's medicinal compounds are most concentrated in the root tissue, drawn down from the leaves and stems as the plant prepares for or recovers from its growing season. Use a clean, sharp spade or garden fork to loosen the soil around the base of the plant, working carefully and slowly so that you expose the root system without severing it roughly. You do not need to take the entire root mass, and you should never take more than 1/3 of the root system from any single plant, both to preserve the plant's health and to ensure that the same specimen can provide again in future seasons. Select a section of root that is roughly the diameter of your thumb or slightly larger, and cut a clean length of approximately 6 to 8 inches using a sharp knife or pruning saw. Brush away the loose soil and bring the root inside. At this point, you will notice that the outer bark of the root is rough, slightly fibrous, and a grayish-brown color. Rinse the root thoroughly under cold running water, using a firm brush to remove any remaining soil from the crevices and surface. Once clean, use your knife to peel away the outer bark layer in long, careful strokes, the way you might peel a thick-skinned vegetable, until you reach the pale, cream-colored inner flesh beneath. It is this inner root flesh that holds the highest concentration of hydrangenol, saponins, and the flavonoids we discussed earlier. Chop or coarsely grate the peeled root into small pieces roughly the size of a large pea or slightly smaller to maximize the surface area that will come into contact with the hot water during the brewing process. You will need approximately 1 heaping tablespoon of this freshly chopped root material for each cup of water you intend to brew. For the Amish preparation, traditionally used during an active kidney stone episode, the standard amount is 3 cups of water to 3 heaping tablespoons of root, brewed as a decoction rather than a standard steep. A decoction means that you are not simply pouring hot water over the plant material and letting it sit. You are placing the root pieces directly into cold water in a small pot, bringing that water slowly up to a gentle rolling simmer over medium heat, and then allowing it to simmer uncovered for a full 20 to 25 minutes. During this time, you will notice the water gradually deepening in color, moving from a pale straw yellow through a warm amber, and eventually settling into a rich honey brown tone with a faintly earthy, subtly sweet aroma that fills the kitchen with something that smells ancient and clean at the same time. After 25 minutes, remove the pot from the heat and allow it to cool for 5 to 10 minutes. Before straining the liquid through a fine mesh strainer or a piece of clean cheesecloth into a cup or mason jar, what remains in your cup is 3 servings of the traditional Amish kidney stone tea to be consumed across the course of the day. 1 cup in the morning, 1 cup in the early afternoon, and 1 final cup in the evening. The Amish healers who documented this preparation consistently noted that results were typically observed within the first 24 hours of beginning this protocol, often in the form of increased urination, a reduction in flank pain, and in many cases the visible passage of small stone fragments or sandy sediment in the urine. For best results, drink an additional 2 to 3 glasses of plain water between each cup of the tea to support the flushing action the root is initiating at the kidney level. If you have access to a small amount of raw, local honey, a single teaspoon stirred into each cup both improves the flavor and adds a mild antimicrobial layer that traditional Amish healers considered a valuable complement to the root's own properties. And if fresh root is not immediately available to you, high-quality, dried wild hydrangea root, sourced from a reputable herbal supplier, can be used in the same proportions and prepared by the same decoction method, with results that traditional practitioners considered essentially equivalent. There is something profound that happens when a person sits down with a cup of tea that they have prepared with their own hands. from a plant they found in the natural world, using knowledge that has survived 3 centuries of industrial pressure, cultural erasure, and pharmaceutical gatekeeping. It is not just a remedy, it is a reclamation. It is the quiet, deeply personal act of deciding that you are not entirely dependent on a system that profits from your suffering, that you have the right to know what the land around you offers, that the wisdom your ancestors carried in their hands and in their remedy books belongs to you as much as it belonged to them. The Amish never stopped believing that. And in a world that has made it increasingly easy to forget, perhaps the most radical thing any of us can do is simply remember. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments below. Have you or someone in your family ever dealt with kidney stones? And did anyone ever tell you that something growing in the natural world might help? Leave your story in the comments right now, because this community learns as much from each other as it does from any video. And your experience might be exactly what someone else scrolling through these comments tonight desperately needs to read. Thank you for watching the Ancestral Vault. We will see you in the next one.